Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Uncorked. Today we are going to be interviewing a friend of mine, Jacob Hoffman, who I know through work. And I would give you an intro, but Jacob has sent us an intro. So we are actually just going to read this intro that we haven't even opened yet for you guys. I'm scared. Let's see what happens. I don't know how this is going to go, but Jacob, this one's on you. Jacob Hoffman is a writer, actor, director, and educator, perhaps best known for his star-making performances as Emma in Song and Dance and Annie Oakley in Annie Get Your Gun, roles for which he won two Tony Awards for Best Actress in a Musical. And then this is what it says. Okay, okay, just kidding. Skip down to the bold italics for some truth. The truth.
Jacob Hoffman is a writer, actor, director, and educator based in New York City. His career began at age 4 when he commissioned, wrote, produced, directed, and starred in his kindergarten class's inaugural and only Thanksgiving Spectacular.
Mm.
Jacob was raised in the Chicago theater scene where he found acclaim as an actor, writer, educator, and administrator. He founded and served as artistic director of Renegade Theater Company, which is a nonprofit organization committed to providing professional opportunities to driven young artists.
Jacob is a graduate of New York University, holding a BFA in drama from the Tisch School of the Arts. Circle of Shame, Jacob's debut film, premiered at the 13th annual Chelsea Film Festival, where it was named audience favorite. His original musical, Maddie and Marky's Magical Musical Mega Show, for which he wrote book, music, and score, had its first public presentation this past fall. Jacob, we're coming for you. Oh,
How y'all doing?
good.
Good.
How's your day been? What have you been up to?
Oh, Wi-Fi. Can you hear me okay? The day's been good. What's been going on? A little bit of teaching. I work in the wellness space. Um, Hold on one second. Y'all look like you're in stop motion. Let me just double check my Wi-Fi here. Yeah, it's been a good day so far. A little bit of teaching, a little bit of reading. I'm gonna say today is the first day of spring because it finally feels like we're getting good weather. So yeah. How about y'all? What have you been doing?
Not a whole lot. Just been hanging out, chatting,
Yapping.
yapping about this podcast.
Yeah.
So we read your intro.
You're welcome.
Funny.
Um, yeah, what do you have to say for yourself?
Well, after the first two Tonys, I wasn't sure if I could keep the streak up. But then, after four and then five and then six. No,
Yeah.
when I first got to New York, there's this thing I'm sure you've seen people do where you'll do like a concert and they'll say, great, give us your credits. And I remember being just out of school and going, I have none. What am I supposed
Yeah.
to do? And so I developed this bit where I would send in, it was usually either Audra McDonald or Bernadette Peters' bio. And
Mhm.
sometimes it killed and sometimes it died. And I don't know, ever since then, I've found it to be a fun icebreaker of sorts.
I
Yeah, that's all I got to say. I hope you found it enjoyable, and I hope the real stuff proves just as exciting as the credits that don't quite belong to me.
I mean, I think it's very telling of your personality to put that in your bio. But yeah, let's chat. Tell us about your journey to New York.
Yeah, oh man. I mean, I was born and raised in Chicago, and I started working as a child actor in the Chicago theater scene when I was about 7. The first play I ever did was a student production of Pippin at Northwestern University, where, fun fact, our leading player was Heather Headley, a college age Heather Headley, and my mom was a college age Kate Baldwin. It was this kind of stacked cast. And so from the time I was like, oh, I'm going to go to Northwestern. I'm going to go to Evanston. I'm going to study at Northwestern. And, at the time, that was kind of the program.
Mm.
And it wasn't until I was about 15, my parents took me on a trip to New York for my birthday. And I've been, working pretty steadily actually as a child actor, bopping from theater to theater. That's the great thing about Chicago is there's so many theater companies. And so I was bopping from theater to theater. Went to New York as a teenager with my folks, and a director I'd worked with said, "Hey, there's this musical playing at Lincoln Center. If you have a chance to see it, you should get a ticket. I hear it's really good." And it was the Aarons and Flaherty musical, A Man of No Importance. And we just so happened, my parents and I, to get tickets to their closing performance. And I don't know if you're familiar with the show, but it's all about theater, and it's about at the time I was still in the closet. It's about a closeted theater director, and I sat in this play, and it was one of the most profound things I'd ever seen. And I felt really moved. And afterward, my mother turned to me with tears in her eyes, and she goes, "I didn't get it before, but I get it now. You have to move here.
Oh,
Things are different here than they are back home, and there's something about this." And I felt the same way, and so I pivoted, and I grew up with a Northwestern trash can in my room, and I lovingly retired the Northwestern trash can. And I pivoted to, all right, maybe it's NYU, or maybe it's Juilliard, or what's going to get me to New York. And so, yeah, I wound up applying to NYU and getting in, and that brought me here to start. And then, yeah, I've lived other places, but I've always had a mailbox in New York City ever since coming to study theater at the Tisch School of the Arts. And yeah, from there, misadventures and work and periods and dry spells and art, and here we are today.
wow. What a journey. I think
Yeah.
that's such a beautiful start as well that your mom sort of saw a part of you in that show and that all kind of came together full circle for you.
Yeah, it was pretty beautiful.
So you started in theater. How did you end up making this film that we're going to be discussing today?
Yeah, I started in theater, trained in theater, spent most of my time right out of school, primarily working as a theater actor. And, fits and starts, and I'd work for a little bit and then I'd have a break. And in the times in between, working as a theater actor, I really wanted to keep my creative engines revving, so to speak. And I
Mm,
never thought of myself as a writer, but I look back now and I've been writing my whole life. And there was a trip to jury duty where I was stuck in a room for 3 days, and I had just purchased an iPad that came with a Bluetooth keyboard. And so I forget how the idea came to me, but I wrote a web series in like 2 days. I wrote, 10, 15-minute episodes. And it was loosely based on my life at the time. My 20s, this is unique to me and no one else. My 20s were super turbulent. Can you believe?
who'd have thought?
Yeah, right? And so I kind of wrote this story about a person loosely based on me and misadventures in New York. And my 20s were really kind of a lot of stuff happened with my family, and a lot of rupture, a lot of repair. And so I was writing about that, kind of meditating on it. And I wrote it, I liked it, I put it down. Other things would pop into my brain, I'd write them, I'd look at them, I'd put them down. And then in the pandemic, I had a break, like many of us did. And I was able to take a step back from my work, primarily as an actor and the things I was doing in between. And I went, okay, what do I like about this? Because there's a lot of things I don't like. But what is it that brings me joy and that keeps me coming back for more? And the core of it was I like making things. I like creating stuff. And
Yeah.
so in the pandemic, I have no memory of this, but somebody tells me that I sat up one day and I said, my friend Olivia works in LA as a literary agent, and I'm going to talk to her, and she's going to be my agent. I don't remember saying this, but evidently I did. My friend Olivia works in literature and entertainment, and I sat down with her and I said, "Hey, here's some ideas I have." And she goes, "Great, I'd love to read them." And I sent her everything I'd ever written, and she was awesome. She unpacked basically everything I had and said, "This idea is great. Right now, it exists as a short story. Maybe think of it as a pilot. And this web series that you wrote, I like, but maybe it's a short film." And so she kind of helped me calibrate all the ideas and put them into new forms. And through that relationship, she started to represent me, and it kind of threw me into the producer meetings, and I had the time and I had this new working relationship. And so suddenly I kind of realized, it's certainly a leap, but it wasn't as far as I imagined it would be coming from primarily acting. And
Yeah.
so I started writing, and in that writing and in meeting producers and in, kind of taking steps forward with certain projects and steps back with others, I began to really crystallize what it was that I wanted to write about. And what I love to write about is stories that feature queer millennials, my generation. And so I really, ours is the generation that kind of were robbed of our forebearers because so many of them were taken due to AIDS. And so we have had to carve this path forward and have had to kind of piece together our history with the help of those who survived, but also kind of figuring out what it is, who we want to be for the next generation. So that really compelled me and sparked something in me. Anyway, long story long, I'd written part of this web series in jury duty. One of the episodes I thought was interesting enough to explore as its own kind of capsule. And that led me to write this story that led to Circle of Shame, the film that's currently in the festival circuit. It's loosely based on what was my nightmare first date story that I used to tell. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but as I began to unpack the idea, I realized in its first iteration, oh, I'm the POV of the writer, the POV of the central character is that this other person on this nightmare date, I'm kind of I'm judging them a lot in how I write this person, and I'm placing a lot of shame on them through my lens. And so I took a step back and thought, what if I reconfigure this and retrofit a more positive spin and a more welcoming spin? And that's how we landed on the story that you all watched. And that's how we landed on a story more about connection in the digital age and less about, here's this crazy story with this person that can you believe? So that's where the third act, the kind of twist comes from. But anyway, I wrote it. And then I had some people in my life who really believed in me. And I thought, you know what, let's make this, let's see what we can do. And friends stepped up and decided to throw money into the project and invest time and energy. And kind of the way things happen, here's a barn, let's put on a play. Throughout the offer and people showed up. Friends were working crew. Folks were coming out of the woodwork to either donate or to be on set. A lot of friends were in it with me. One of my dear friends ended up directing the piece. Yeah, so kind of the incubation, the writing took the longest, and then once we kind of decided to go, it was really a fast process. When I look back at it, I can't believe we did it in ultimately from let's make this happen to picture lock was maybe 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah, the shoot was 3 days. It was quick, quick, quick.
I feel like the pandemic was a big turning point for a lot of people creatively. I feel like it really, like you were going somewhere, this happened, and your complete like life changed. Do you feel like you would be where you are today without it? Or I'm sure that's a question that everyone has been asked, but I think it's so interesting how people's journeys can
Oh,
change.
totally. Yeah, I was actually leading up to the pandemic, I was very frustrated with where things were heading in my artistic life. I didn't feel fulfilled in my theater work. I wasn't getting the type of jobs I wanted. And so in January of 2020, I bid adieu to my team. So I walked away from my agents at the time, my managers at the time. Um, and I was working on a show that was closing March 8th of 2020. And I loved the people, but I just think something wasn't working. And so
Yeah.
I remember saying out loud, the show closes on March 8th, and next week something's going to change. So I'm sorry that I
It's
did that to us.
all your
Um,
fault.
it's all me.
Mhm.
What's
I
funny
know.
is the theater was in Connecticut. And so we were in like a hot spot. Like looking back, like everybody had this mystery cold and nobody knew what was going on. But no, so I entered COVID and I was seeing like people I was close to with their agents trying to figure out what self tapes were going to be. And just this, that whole,
Yeah.
those growing pains I went through. I was kind of immune to that because I didn't have anybody calling me for auditions. I was frustrated. I, stepped away from certain working relationships and then I had time.
Yeah.
I was working in other fields and I was keeping a roof over my head and the lights on, but there really was more space. And because, I was so isolated, I was, in a pod with my partner at the time and my brother for a little bit. And so this long stretch of very little distraction the outside world felt very scary. And so beyond staying informed of, what the numbers were and what to do and not do, I really had time, like I said, to take a step back and assess, what is it that I enjoy? And so, oh yeah, like that was my writer's retreat. I spent months and
Yeah.
months and months just pouring on. I have a novel in the works that I wouldn't have started if I hadn't had time in COVID. There's this movie that we're talking about. It's part of a trilogy. I wrote the other two scripts in COVID. So I had all of this time during lockdown to A of all figure out what it is I wanted to do and then do that thing. So yeah, it was as scary as it was a huge gift.
Yeah. Is this the first time you've ever tackled anything through film? Was this like the first ever project you did with filming? That's
Yeah, I'd
wild.
never, isn't that something? It
That's
was really,
wild.
yeah, the cool thing, we kind of fell into this mission for the project, but we
Yeah.
ended up letting the team be a very, like a hybrid model of folks who were experienced in their field and
Mhm.
folks who were new. So I'd acted before, I'd written, I'd never been a published writer, I'd never executive produced, I'd never been, the star of a film project. And so that was like my testing ground. Our director is a beautiful stills photographer who'd never done live action. Our DP was worked in lighting and had never worked as a director of photography. So we kind of had folks stepping into new roles, expanding their reach. And then there were other folks on the team who, like our A2 and our A1, like that's what they do. Our assistant director, that's what they do. Our producers, things like that. But it really was an opportunity for everybody to try something new, to deepen their well. Yeah, no, it was our first attempt at this, and I'm really proud at how it all turned out.
And you should be. It was so, so much fun to watch. It was because I know you from work and I know you privately, watching this film was so funny to me because it was like, yeah, this is Jacob. Like, this screams your humor, but also you care so much, I think, about the story and about the way it's being told. And you can tell there was a lot of love and hard work put into it. And the writing was great. So it was just a joy to watch. And I'm so curious what is happening with the other two parts? Have you started with that yet? Or is that like,
Circle of Shame is like a semi-autobiographical comedy short. I call it kind of a sex romp. And it's real. I think the theme is, finding connection, queer connection in the digital age, hookup culture, kink shaming. And so that was its own piece.
mm,
And as I was writing this one story, other ideas were coming to mind. And I've learned my writing style, I kind of let sparks fly and I put a bunch of stuff on paper and then I let kind of each muse kind of wave me over. So I'd started this script and I was maybe halfway through and then I started something else and then something else. And then I kind of sat back and Circle of Shame was like, write me. And I went, great, I wrote Circle of Shame. And then I wrote another story. And had another idea and a bunch of other stuff kind of in the works. I was on a trip. Um, I was looking at the ocean, I remember, and the light bulb went off. Oh, these other two stories are also, like I said, in this oeuvre of queer connection, but these other two stories really line up with this first one. And so I started to unpack and realize that by accident, I'd written a trilogy. And so the second film is about intergenerational connection in the queer community. So an older gentleman who survived AIDS and who's in his 60s is
mm,
connecting with a younger person. And then the third movie is all about connection to the self. So it's about a gay guy who has to summon his own masculine and feminine sides and put them together to win. And so as I was putting that together, I realized not only were the stories connected thematically, but I could connect them through character. So I'm the central character in the first film. My character is then a secondary character in the second film. And then the central character in movie two plays a small role in movie three. And so they all kind of weave. So they're in the same universe. They've been written. I've got some folks interested in helping me produce and direct. If anybody watching wants to throw me money that would help.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're in the fundraising process now and putting together a rough calendar, best case scenario start date and then kind of secondary options, but to make, 2026 into 2027 the year of the second film. And then the third, we'll see how far we get in that process. But the third is the most ambitious as far as scale. And the second is also, we're hoping to just keep expanding the reach and the universe. First movie features really three people. The second features a principal cast of about seven with like extras and background. And then the third movie is a set piece and it takes place in a forest. So we gotta really, yeah, move and shake to make that happen. But I'm excited.
That was one of the things Emily and I were curious about with the crowdfunding. Like,
Mm.
how does that process work on your end, getting into it? Like, talk us through that process.
Ugh. Oh, I mean, I will say, like, I have so much gratitude to the folks that made this movie happen because it really it takes a village. It's true for every project, but I think especially film, just because so many disparate departments and bodies have to make decisions that ultimately come together in a way that it just doesn't happen in theater. You kind of have to at least be kind of close to the people you're working with. Your
Yeah.
costumers have to be kind of in the same realm as the set builders and the actors and producers and company management. The film of it all is really it's a wide web, but it was yeah, we crowdfunded and did all the research of the different platforms and the fees they take and the timelines they put out and certain sites if you don't meet your minimum then they keep the money. It's very complicated, and so
Yeah.
I called every person I knew, and mind you, this was also coming out of COVID. So this was like 2022 into 2023. So people weren't totally keen to be spending money on something they didn't understand. And so phone calls and emails and social media pushes and website building. And it was hard. It's not for the faint of heart. Crowdsourcing is a tough sell. But the adage is true. Like the first project is easier to fund than the second. I never really asked for help in this way from most people in my life. And so, $20 here, $50 there. That was most of our funding was through very small individual donations from, I want to say it was upwards of 100 people. We had a couple of donors who threw some larger amounts our way, which was super helpful.
Yeah.
One mission of the project was we wanted to pay people fairly. And so, our day rate for our talent was really high and our crew rate, like people were paid, not like they would be on a major budget or a bigger project, but considering it was a micro SAG agreement, people
Yeah.
were paid fairly, which felt really good to do. Yeah, it took forever. It takes bravery. I also learned, I'm really good at advocating for other people, but when it came to this was my name, it's, my face is all over it. That was scary. And so it forced me to really kind of like in the pandemic, step back and go, okay, you believe in this, right? So if you believe in this, then you need to find a way to advocate for this and to get over the fear of approaching aunts and uncles and friends and colleagues. And I spoke to folks who I hadn't talked to in a while who worked in film to pick their brain. And then at the end of the call say, and also like, if you have 30 bucks to spare, it's hard.
Yeah.
But it worked out for the first one. Yeah, we'll see how, as we continue, I'll keep you posted how the second fundraising push goes.
Patrick and I both very much relate to what you're saying about advocating for your own projects or your own
Yeah.
um, passions, because we do that with this podcast where, you know, every dollar helps and every listen helps, every like helps. Any sort of support really does make a difference, but it's asking the people and being, I think, brave, like you said, and bold enough to actually ask. It feels like a big ask, but most people are very willing to help and very willing to support. So, yeah, I can definitely relate to everything you just said about putting yourself out there and um yeah, just taking that step. Jacob, I'm very excited for these next two films as well. Where would you be posting them ideally? Because it's is it a web series? You said it's three parts, but it's not really feature films and they're not, Are they considered short films?
Yeah, so they're short films for sure. They all are roughly, we'll see what the final edit looks like. They all live just under 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So the idea would be eventually to have them all be of a piece. So you could watch them together and you've got, probably just over an hour of entertainment. They move through genre. So the first one's a sex romp, the second is like a rom-dram, the third one is a horror comedy.
Mm,
So eventually what's so cool is the digital viewing space is changing so rapidly. So when this first was in production, the thought was, okay, well, maybe it'll live on a streamer. Maybe we can get, somebody to want to purchase that. And that's still a great idea. But then, over the last couple of years, sites like YouTube and their reach and the ways in which they allow their creators to retain control of their product, their art, is really inspiring. So short answer is we don't quite know where everything's going to land. My
yeah.
co-executive producer and I have been pretty intent on keeping this first film under wraps until it's finished its life. So right now we're still in the festival circuit. We're still, waiting to hear if we're going to premiere at certain cities and certain times. So once that arc has ended, which will likely be in the fall or winter, then it'll probably live, maybe it'll be behind a paywall, maybe it'll live on YouTube. But eventually, once all three are completed, I'd love for it to be a piece where you can see all three in succession, follow these characters, look at these stories of connection. Yeah, it lives in proof of concept land. These themes, these characters live in other works, but I'd also be really content to see these three stories about connection in the LGBTQIA plus community live somewhere where folks can see them. So maybe that'll be YouTube, maybe it'll be circleofshamemovie.com. We'll see.
How was finding out that this short that you had created had its premiere at the Chelsea Film Festival? That is a big title. That's an
Oh,
incredible achievement.
that was really exciting. Um, movie making's hard, y'all.
Yeah,
We made it. It's so many lessons learned. It was our first project, so a lot of things on the back end that we hadn't considered, and money we hadn't allocated for certain budgetary costs. Like there was just a lot of surprises along the way, and we rolled with
yeah,
the punches, learned a lot. And then, you finish your movie, you have it, you like it, and one option is to then enter the festival circuit, so to start submitting. And
yeah,
that's kind of, like a microcosm of what it is to be in commercial arts anyway, which is a lot of rejection. And so, just festival after festival. And mind you, we went for our big, I think we started with 12, like the big, dream festivals in major cities, everyone that you've heard of. And, festival after festival was a no, 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 no. I resigned myself to, all right, I'm proud of this. If nobody else likes it, that's okay. And then yeah, I was on a trip actually back home to Chicago, and the word came in that we were gonna premiere at Chelsea. And it was awesome. It was really exciting. And it then kind of launched, we called it our Blitz. We just went ham with social media.
yeah,
My Our executive producer was really committed to let's just get the word out. And that actually turned out to be really fun. I've never loved social media, but man, putting reels together and posts and stuff, it was great. Chelsea's awesome. The people that run it are a mother and daughter team. They're lovely. They really believe in the cause. And it was really special. I think the best part of things like that is to meet other art makers and
yeah,
to, have that moment in the sun. Filmmaking can be this really insular process. And so to have it received and, we ran into issues because our showing was oversold. And so, oh, where are we going to sit? But like, what a great problem to have.
yeah,
Yeah, it was again like being coming from theater. It's like you especially in comedy, you build those moments in a room and then you fine tune them in front of an audience, and so you get that immediate feedback. To be in the edit doc and to just wonder like, okay, this makes me laugh, but I've also seen it 800 times, to then have it play for strangers and for them to laugh. Like, I mean, who needs alcohol? Who needs a drug? That is the best high you could ever you could ever achieve. It was really special.
I would love to dive a little more into the story of your short.
Yeah.
So Circle of Shame. That is a loaded title. I am so curious. Where did that come about? What is your, this is sort of a deep question. What is your, I guess, relationship to the word shame? And do you feel like that's changed a little bit since making this film?
So, like I mentioned before, and for those that haven't seen it, we do kind of I'll share this. There is a twist
There is,
of kind of getting up to that point and saving it for those that haven't seen it. The movie is about a guy named Ben, the character I play, who's on the rebound after a bad breakup, and he discovers this like really smoking hot guy on the apps. He invites him over. There's a moment of uncertainty. Oh, should I go? He's so hot. My character's roommate, inspires me to go. And the kind of mantra of the roommate is like, you say no to things. The thing getting in your way is you don't say yes enough. So tonight you just have to say yes. And so my character shows up with the, instructions to say yes at every opportunity. And little does he know his yes is put to the test. And this guy kind of presents a lot of, it dives into kink shaming and preferences in sexual situations and connection. And so, anyway, as I shared before, this was born out of my nightmare date story. I went on a date with a guy in college. I'd just been dumped. He was so hot. And I showed up at the date, and as kindly as I can say it, like his and my, we just didn't vibe. The things he was looking for didn't align with what I was looking for. It was a little bit of a this moment. And in the moment, it had a lot to do with I don't want to anger a particular company whose mascot is a mouse, but it had a lot to do with a particular type of a branded experience, one might say. On the back end, I told this story, like your worst date, whatever, and I would tell this story, and it, got laughs. And I'm a storyteller, so over the years, I refined it and I, pepped it up. And as I was writing it as a part of this larger series, it was a standalone episode where this character, my kind of avatar, goes on a nightmare date. And as I was unpacking that story, like I said before, I realized, whoa, I don't know if I like the person who wrote this. The POV of the storyteller is like really judgmental of this other character. I changed it in its original iteration to something involving like babies and diapers and all that kind of stuff. And again, I was writing it and I was like, that isn't necessarily something that appeals to me, but who cares if that appeals to somebody else? And who am I to judge another person's preferences, right? And so the notion of kink shaming entered my awareness, and I thought, oh, cool, like what a fun, suddenly this idea that had been with me for years felt really exciting. And so I thought, wow, like what if I turn the idea of kink shaming on its head? And what if I turn the idea of preferences and connection on its head? And so that's where the twist and the kind of third act of the piece comes in. And, I think I'll speak for myself, but I do know a lot of folks, who I'm close with from the gay community. We unpack a lot of shame, I think, in our adulthoods. Moving through the world as a person who for a while had a secret, and moving through a world that implicitly and otherwise told me that this core part of who I was either wrong or needed to be hidden. That
yeah.
led to a lot of, as I've gone through therapy and grown, a lot of really examining just how much I was asked to hide and what that continual hiding did to how I saw myself. So this movie was a really fun way to kind of unpack that in a way that I hope is entertaining, but also a little maybe not challenging, but offers a shift of perspective. And I think shame is the thief of joy. And I think shame ultimately is a real barrier to
Mm,
connection, to the self, to other people. And
yeah.
so I think another theme of the film that I'm really proud of is, we're able to dismantle shame if we talk about the thing we're ashamed of, right? And so often we'll say the thing out loud and realize, ooh, these words don't hold as much power when they're floating in the ether as they do when they're in my heart or in my head. And so the hope was to, tell a story where there's evidence to show that if you say the thing and if you get brave and if you are open and honest, chances are, at the very least, you'll feel free. and maybe you'll find connection and people who are able to see you. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on shame.
I love that response. And it also, I was talking to Patrick about this prior to us coming on this interview. I don't know if you've ever seen the film Spoiler Alert. Have you seen that?
Oh, I mean,
Yeah, with the Smurf obsession.
oh
Uh,
yeah.
that was such a wonderful part of that film because similar to what you were exploring, but they tackled it in a different way, where what do you do when you are in a situation where somebody has a preference that you're not necessarily aware of? And how do you handle that when it's presented to you in the best way possible? And that's what it made me think of was that initial moment that I had watching Spoiler Alert and being like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I would do. Like, I think I would just be like, okay, how do we move on from this? Something that you keep saying, which was such a big and beautiful part of the film, is the connection. When you're real with yourself and you're honest with yourself, that's where it starts. It actually has nothing to do with the other person. And I really felt like that message was clear from what you had created.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's awesome to hear. That's great.
I think the other thing that I found really powerful within it was as queer people, we have this goal to have everyone feel accepted, have everyone
Mm.
feel loved, and we're some of the first people to judge. So I thought that was like a really good thing for the friend to really push him and be like, just say yes, just say yes, just say yes. Because honestly, the hardest part is just literally going. Um, there were moments where I was laughing and it just brought back other memories, like into the text popping up. Like there were all these like random that were so funny. But I thought that really pushed the character and
Yeah.
really brought him out of his shell. And honestly, I feel like rewarded him in more ways than others. So it paid off.
Yeah.
And it's going to be quite a
Oh,
sequel.
good.
So
That makes me so happy. Yeah, we premiered at a queer film festival in the Bay Area, and Chelsea was wonderful. A very diverse group. It was really cool to be in an audience of mostly queer filmmakers to see how it played, and it was so gratifying to hear folks who really recognize the themes of the story. And I think
Yeah.
that's what I hope to do with this project and future projects is to really tell those stories, right? Like the ones that keep us in the center and also like play to, it's heightened obviously, but yeah, like a lot of the reality of how it is to date and to hook up and what it is to be seen or not want to be seen. I love that that was your experience. That's awesome.
I liked it also how the different conversations between the friend and just the hookup alone. I think it's so interesting how once you get sex involved, like the conversations have so much more like momentum for
Yeah.
them. Like with his friend, he was so open. And then once you involve sex, it's like this whole layer of like, oh my God, what do you think they'll think? And it's just funny.
Yeah. The idea of saying yes to more things, has that influenced you in many ways, or do you think you were already on that path when that sort of came about in the script?
That's a great question. I'm actually trying to remember where that idea even came from. I think that just came in the writing process.
Yeah.
Originally, the first iteration of the story, the roommate's name is Pierre. There was no Pierre. It was just this guy, and it was a meet cute, and then there's a twist. And so adding the roommate was just kind of a way to kind of give my character an aspirational figure. We got Tomas Matos, who's fabulous and in Fire Island, and is currently starring on Broadway in When Playwrights Kill, and they're wonderful. And they took the words on the page and just like, oh my gosh, this Technicolor performance. And that's exactly what I was hoping for was this not just the person who comes in and is magical and is kind of tertiary to the central story, but who's an aspirational figure, somebody who
Yeah.
lives in bravery. And
Mm.
so at the time I wrote it, at the time we produced it, I think the making of the movie was me trying to say yes, was me going, okay, I have this script. And like I said, the turnaround was really quick. I said, you know what? I think it was maybe January, December. And I said, screw it. It's January 2023. Let's shoot in mid-February. No pre-production, nothing. And then suddenly we're fundraising and going. And so that was kind of me trying to say yes. I think what's been really meaningful though is as we finish the project and more people have seen it, to hear people say, this is a version of my story that I haven't heard told, or this is something that I deeply relate to, that for me has helped me keep
Mm.
yes in the ether.
Yeah.
I remember I started lifting weights. I was a yoga girly forever, and I started lifting weights, and it was one of those things where I'd have something heavy, and I had to lean into the mantra. It's so silly, but I like, you can do this, you can do this. For whatever reason, that stuck with me. And so now when hard things pop up, it's so simple, but that inner voice that says, you can do this, that's kind of my version of yes.
Mm.
Because New York's hard and life's tricky. And so just to kind of have that mantra of like, continue, press on, you can do this, that's kind of where I live in that space.
And what a great space to be in, to continue to push yourself and evolve and
Yeah,
try, at least try to say yes. I think sometimes it is challenging, and sometimes we're
totally.
not meant to say yes as well. We need to set boundaries to a certain extent. Um, but I loved that concept of just say yes and see what happens, especially when you're so closed off to something. Give it a chance before you reject it because you never know.
Yeah. And then the cool thing is finally, my character is able to say, actually, not no, but that isn't really for me, and I
Yeah.
think that that's kind of like the tagline of that whole mantra is like say yes and also be honest. I think say what it is you want, I think is more at the heart of where the movie actually lands. And I think, what's cool is like those characters get there, which is great.
Well, it's having those two opposites. It's having the say yes to everything and I don't want to do anything. And I'm scared of everything and
Yes.
I'm against everything. So like you have to land somewhere in the middle where you find that
Yeah.
equilibrium at some point. If you could show Circle of Shame to a younger you, how do you think you would feel about it? Or like how do you think
Oh,
your younger self would react?
yeah. You know, I've thought about that a lot recently, actually. I remember as a littler person, I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. I was a pretty lonely little boy. And then I found theater. And the beautiful thing, and I swap stories with peers today. I've learned on the back end how lucky I was. I was surrounded by mostly adults who were gentle and considerate and kind. And so I was shepherded, I was raised by this really, really beautiful community of folks back in Chicago. And I remember though, in spite of all that, I still didn't have friends. You can only get so deep when you're 12 and the person you're talking to is 30, right? And
Yeah.
and so I didn't have a lot of peers that I felt that I could connect to. And I remember when I was considering leaving Chicago and moving to a new city, I just so desperately wanted to stand in wonder of my life. And at the time, that was connected to a very specific version of success. I wanted to stand in wonder of my name on a marquee or of the work I was going to book. And in my time in New York, in the in between of not quite getting where I wanted to go and carving out this path that's so complicated and tricky, I built a family here. I have this incredible network of friends, chosen family. There's actually a great photo of the premiere at Chelsea. They all came out to see the movie. There's like 30 of us. It was amazing. And so little Jacob couldn't fathom having one friend, let alone 20. And
Yeah.
little Jacob, I don't think could quite imagine a world where he would be like desirable. I remember we were shooting the movie. I'm in my underwear and I was like, oh, people are going to see this. Like I hadn't thought about, I wrote it and I thought it was funny. And then I started producing it. And then we were on set in front of cameras. And I was like, oh, right. Like you're basically naked for half this movie. I didn't think, oh, yeah, your parents are going to see this. And so, yeah, I think, to see an older version of myself who's empowered and who's at the center of a story,
Mm.
who's worthy of love, and then just the actual making of the thing that so many people stepped up to help me realize a vision. I continually now stand in wonder of my life. It
Mm.
is all because of the people in it. And I've said it privately, but I'm thrilled to say it publicly. It is the best thing I've ever done. I consider it my life's work. Having built a community in this city, the people that I have, I am, it's beyond.
Mm. Oh, and it's so, I'm just sitting here remembering when I first met you, and I was the one feeling like, how do I befriend this awesome human being and somebody I look up to so much and has so much energy and love and life. And that just goes to show like you just don't know somebody's story. You don't know where somebody comes from and what they've been through and the things that they've experienced to get to where they are. But the person I always saw, and I want to tell you this, that the person I always saw in you is a confident person and somebody who is brave and very real. And I think that that's really all I look for in anyone is an honest person and somebody being authentically themselves. And you've always appeared that way to me. So that makes me very happy to know that you feel the way that you do about everything
Thank
that
you.
you've achieved and where you're at in your life.
Thank you. That's very sweet. Thank you. And right back at you. Yeah.
Do you ever feel, in a sense, that you have to protect your private and personal self while at the same time exposing yourself as an artist? Because I think that that's always a tricky sort of
Mhm.
balance of I want to protect my personal life and who I truly am, but then there's also vulnerability in the work that you do. So how do you balance that?
That's a great question. I think, when I first started acting and then acted as an adult, there was a real protection in playing character. And
Yeah.
so revealing myself actually felt very foreign and off limits. I didn't want to, like, that's why social media at first felt very crunchy for me because, oh, I don't want to share all that with the masses.
Mhm.
The masses.
The process.
Oh my gosh. And so, to a certain degree, I mean, Ben is a fictional character. It's loosely, and that word is so key. It is so loosely based on my own experience, but I feel comfortable sharing is my perspective, my take on things. I'm
Mhm.
proud of how this movie, its particular tilt and how it sees, like hookup culture and kink shaming and dating and what it is to be a queer person in the digital age. That I think is very true to my thoughts and my feelings. And that doesn't necessarily give you a window into my day to day or my deepest, darkest self. But it does, I think, like you said, I'm so happy to hear that you could see me in, how that story got told. And so that's kind of what I hope to share is my take, so to speak, the stories I tell and the particular slice of what it is to be, a queer millennial. That to me does feel deeply personal.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and the personal life of it all, I don't know. I don't even think it's as interesting as the stories I'm telling. Like I'm an interesting person, but like my day to day, whatever. But hey, the story I'm telling, come listen to that because I think that's actually really cool. And
Yeah.
I guess that's where I'm most excited to curate. I don't necessarily need to curate my personhood through the lens of a screen or an app.
Mm.
My Instagram existence to me isn't as interesting as the words I'm writing and the refining I'm doing in, final draft and or the score I'm publishing or whatever. That to me is a more interesting view into my heart and my mind. Um, yeah, and it kind of leaves day-to-day Jacob to the side.
Since we are an independent film podcast, um, do you have a favorite indie film that you would like to share with us, or a film that has inspired you, maybe even to make this film? Um, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that question. I mean, when I was the first one that comes to mind, and it was the first time I really remember um, being on the receiving end of word of mouth buzz was
Mhm.
when Camp got released. That indie, all about that summer camp. I think they filmed it at French Woods. Um, yeah, it's like the theater version of Wet Hot American Summer. I was at a party. I was a tween, I think, and an adult. This guy Rob came up to me and he's like, "You need to see Camp." I was like, okay. And so I went and I bought a ticket and I got to the theater and I was like, oh my gosh, like this was made for me. Um, so that's an indie that holds a special place in my heart just because it's just all in jokes and it's for theater kids. And that's kind of what I hope to make, is like a movie that really resonates with maybe 10 people. And if it doesn't reach the masses, that's probably even better anyway.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's what's coming to mind right off the jump is like my one of my favorite indies. Yeah, and it might have been one of the first independent films that I knew was an independent film that I went to theaters to see. In the years since, especially since streaming happened, like so many movies, are at your fingertips, but this was one that I had to like go to the theater. I liked it so much I had to wait for it to be released on DVD and then buy the DVD. So that
Mhm.
for me was a real, and also it felt like it was made for me, oh, whoa,
Yeah.
like they're singing Losing My Mind in the bus. Like that's me. That's my references, So that felt really,
And then we had a little fun question for you.
yeah.
So, something Emily and I like to do on the podcast is with every film we talk about, we pair it with a bottle of wine. So, our question for you is, what kind of wine would you pair with Circle of Shame?
Oh, goodness, my ignorance on wine is about to show. I would pair Circle of Shame with I would pair Circle of Shame with a really buttery sparkling something. Maybe it's like a champagne or like a sparkling rosé. And then I would chase it with a shot of tequila. A
Funny
little
when
wild, a little effervescent. Yeah.
yes, I instantly was like pink champagne. Like that was my first
Love.
thought for it. So, yeah, we're
Yes.
definitely on the same page. And
Yeah.
also, when we describe wines, we're in the same realm as you are. We are not wine connoisseurs, and the
Great.
descriptions are can be very vivid. And sometimes we paint very strange pictures, but listen, it's all right, Jacob. This was so fun. Thank you for coming on our podcast.
Thanks so much, y'all. This was so fun.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank
And thank you
you.
for sharing so many personal stories with us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. Bye, Jacob.
Bye.
Jacob Hoffman is writer, actor, director, and educator based in New York City. Born into a musical family, Hoffman grew up in Fresno, California, and received his classical vocal training at New York's Juilliard School. This is not real. A year after graduating, he won his first Tony Award for Best Performance by a featured actress in a musical for Carousel at Lincoln Center Theater, 1994. What is this?
And it continues. Over the next 4 years, he received two additional Tony Awards in the Featured Actress category for his performance in the Broadway premieres of Terrence McNally's play Master Chess in 1996 and his musical Ragtime, 1998, making an unpresent
Yeah, what? Jacob!
earning 3 Tony Awards before the age of 30. Impressive.
Who knew?
In 2004, he won his fourth Tony in A Raisin in the Sun.
I can't. I
And
can't.
in 2012, he won his fifth and her first in the leading actress category for her title role performance in the Gershwin's Porgy and Bess.
Who the fuck knows? Jacob, I'm cutting this. This is not coming in the intro. You know how long this is 2 pages.
Save to the cloud.
How do I?
I think you ended.